On June 22, 1941, Soviet KV-1 heavy tanks rolled forward from positions near Raseiniai, Lithuania, carrying 75 to 90 millimeters of frontal glacis armor and turret protection, reaching 100 millimeters effective thickness. The German Wehrmacht's primary anti-tank weapon, the 3.7 centimeter Pak-36, possessed a maximum penetration capability of 36 millimeters at 500 meters under optimal impact angles. This created a material disparity that defined the opening days of Operation Barbarossa. The German shell would stop at the armor surface, while over 50 millimeters of hardened steel remained untouched. The 45-ton KV-1 outweighed Germany's standard Panzer 3 by 23 tons, its armor thickness exceeding the Panzer III's 30 millimeter frontal plate by a factor of 3. If you're interested in how wars are actually decided by logistics, math, weapons, and doctrine, subscribe now. Turn on notifications and stay tuned for more in-depth World War II analysis. Let's continue. German forces entering Lithuania carried over 1,000 Pak-36 guns distributed across divisional anti-tank battalions along the entire Eastern Front. The Pak-36's armor-piercing projectile achieved 745 meters per second muzzle velocity, but KV-1 armor absorbed this energy across rolled homogeneous steel sloped at 30 degrees from vertical, creating effective thickness exceeding 100 millimeters against the Pak-36's penetration vector. German crews nicknamed the weapon the tank door knocker, Panzer-Klopfgerät, after rounds bounced harmlessly off Soviet heavy armor at Raseiniai Crossroads. The upgraded 5 centimeter Pak-38, distributed to frontline units beginning in early 1941, penetrated approximately 60 to 79 millimeters at 500 meters with standard armor-piercing ammunition. This represented a significant improvement over the Pak-36, yet remained insufficient against KV-1 glacis armor. Units of the 6th Panzer Division possessed only limited numbers of Pak-38 guns on June 22, maintaining obsolete Pak-36 weapons as the battalion's numerical backbone. Soviet designers at the Kirov plant in Leningrad had specified heavy frontal protection back in 1938, specifically to defeat the anti-tank guns then equipping Western European armies, creating a multi-year technological lead that no German weapon in standard service could overcome. The KV-1's 76.2 mm ZIS 5-gun fired a 6.5 kilogram armor-piercing round penetrating 69 to 77 millimeters at 500 meters, sufficient to pierce any German tank's frontal armor at Barbarossa's opening. The Panzer III carried 30 millimeters of frontal armor. The Panzer IV possessed 50 millimeters. Both were vulnerable to the Soviet gun across standard engagement distances of 400 to 800 meters. This mathematical reality, 90 millimeters of armor versus 36 millimeters of penetration equals invulnerability, would dominate the tactical calculations at Raseiniai over the coming days. On or around June 24, 1941, the encounter that would become legendary unfolded. A lone KV-1 heavy tank positioned itself at a crossroads near Raseiniai, blocking a bridge spanning a narrow stream. The 45-ton behemoth sat across a passage too narrow for bypass, transforming a transportation artery into a tactical dead end. The stream banks prevented flanking maneuvers, forcing any approaching column into a killing corridor with no alternative routes through the marshy ground flanking the road. The turret traversed toward the eastern approach, its 76.2 mm gun barrel commanding an open sight line extending hundreds of meters down the straight road. The V2 diesel engine idled, conserving fuel while maintaining readiness for the 550 horsepower power plant to engage if extraction became necessary. Elements of the German 6th Panzer Division advanced from the east under morning conditions. Their lead vehicles rolled forward into what appeared to be an abandoned crossroads, except for the angular hull blocking the bridge. The roadblock's main gun fired, The 76.2mm armor-piercing round crossed the distance in under a second before striking the lead vehicle's frontal plate. German armor, designed to resist 37mm guns at standard combat ranges, disintegrated under the kinetic energy of the heavier Soviet projectile, ammunition cooking off and scattering debris as stored rounds detonated. The KV-1 recoiled on soft soil, its wide tracks compressing the earth beneath 45 tons, and the crew worked the manual traverse mechanism to acquire secondary targets. The coaxial DT machine gun opened fire, 7.62mm rounds engaging German infantry dismounting from half-tracks, drawing from the thousands of rounds stored in hull racks. What followed was a systematic destruction of approaching German vehicles and anti-tank positions that lasted the better part of a day. As the lone KV-1 held its ground at the choke point, German anti-tank crews brought up their PaK-38 guns and fired armor-piercing rounds at the KV-1's frontal glacis. Each projectile ricocheted, deflected by welded armor plates that exceeded the gun's penetration threshold. The crews, trained on doctrine that positioned the 50mm as adequate against any known Soviet armor, watched their rounds spark harmlessly off steel that invalidated 2 years of tactical planning. The PaK-36 fared even worse. Rounds struck the KV-1's side plates from close range, each projectile bouncing off with metallic impacts audible across the battlefield. The door knocker had met a door it could not open. German commanders escalated to the 88mm flak gun, a weapon designed for anti-aircraft duty, but pressed into ground combat due to the absence of heavier anti-tank solutions. Crews positioned their gun at distance from the KV-1's position, firing high-velocity rounds that struck the turret's thick cast armor. The impacts created visible cratering, but reportedly achieved no decisive penetration at the engagement angle, the shell's energy dissipating across curved surfaces that distributed force beyond the weapon's defeat parameters. Stuka dive bombers attacked the position, releasing bombs that detonated around the target but left the 45-ton KV-1 undamaged, its mass and armor resistant to near-miss blast effects. Per German after-action reports, the lone KV-1 destroyed roughly a dozen vehicles and anti-tank positions, a tactical toll that transformed a single heavy tank into a zone denial weapon, blocking an entire division's advance for the better part of a day. The crew's identity remains unknown to history. According to German accounts, the tank was eventually neutralized through a combination of 88mm fire directed at close range to exploit weaker points, and infantry assault with explosive charges. The crew had been killed or incapacitated fighting from their vehicle. They did not evacuate or surrender. When German soldiers finally approached the silent hull, they found the armor pocked with impact craters but unbreached across its frontal arc. The men inside had fought until they could not fight any longer. German troops reportedly buried the crew with military honors, a rare acknowledgement of the respect this single vehicle had earned through a day of mechanical defiance. The KV-1's mechanical weaknesses told the other half of the Raseiniai story, and every other KV-1 story from the summer of 1941. The tank's transmission was never adequately designed for the vehicle's combat weight. Internal components ground against hardened steel gears under 45 tons of sustained load, a weight class the drivetrain was not engineered to handle. Gear teeth fractured under cyclical loading as lubricant temperatures exceeded operational tolerances during extended combat operations. KV-1 crews throughout the campaign reported transmissions seizing after sustained operations, transforming mobile fortresses into static pillboxes. Experienced drivers learned to baby the gearbox, avoiding aggressive shifting and high-speed maneuvers that accelerated wear, but in combat, gentle driving was a luxury no crew could afford. The V2 diesel engine produced adequate power at 550 horsepower, but the drivetrain could not reliably deliver it to the tracks under combat conditions. Across the northern and central fronts, more KV-1s were lost to mechanical breakdown and fuel exhaustion than to enemy fire in the war's opening weeks. The steel fortress that could shrug off every anti-tank round in the German arsenal surrendered to its own gearbox with grinding regularity. Similar encounters multiplied across the front throughout late June and July 1941. German after-action reports documented KV-1s absorbing dozens of anti-tank rounds without penetration, destroying multiple vehicles before being neutralized, usually by mechanical failure, fuel starvation, or infantry assault rather than direct anti-tank fire. Near Riga in late June, KV-1s engaged lighter German and Czech-built tanks whose crews found themselves completely unable to penetrate the Soviet heavy armor envelope. Frontline reports documented similar incidents across the northern sector throughout July, each reinforcing the same conclusion. The Wehrmacht's entire anti-tank doctrine, built around the PaK-36 and supplemented by the PaK-38, had been rendered obsolete by a single class of Soviet vehicle that German intelligence had failed to anticipate. The institutional response came swiftly. Heeresgruppe Nord requested redeployment of 88mm flak batteries to ground roles, stripping air defense from rear area installations across the northern sector. The 88mm gun-firing Panzergranate 39 armor-piercing rounds achieved penetration of approximately 120mm at 1,000 meters, the minimum reliable threshold for KV-1 engagement at standard combat ranges. Luftwaffe objections regarding reduced aircraft protection were overruled by OKH staff who had read the frontline reports. The Waffenamt accelerated development timelines for the Panzerkampfwagen 6 project in the summer of 1941, mandating frontal armor standards exceeding 100mm and main gun penetration capability against 90mm plate at 1,500 meters. Henschel and Porsche received contracts for competing prototypes, with delivery deadlines compressed from original planning estimates. The requirement specification explicitly referenced encounters with Soviet heavy armor, stating the new tank must achieve invulnerability to Soviet heavy tank fire while ensuring destruction of any known or projected Soviet armor. The Tiger I program, which had existed in various forms since pre-war infantry support tank concepts, received accelerated funding and urgency driven directly by KV-1 shock reports from the front. The encounters did not single-handedly create the Tiger, but they transformed an evolving design requirement into an emergency. The math that defined Raseiniai, 90mm of Soviet armor versus 36mm of German penetration, had delivered the shock that forced Germany to confront a reality its planners had not anticipated. That the enemy they expected to collapse in weeks possessed armor their entire anti-tank arsenal could not defeat. A lone KV-1 at a Crossroads had held a Panzer division. Its transmission failed where tungsten core projectiles could not penetrate. And somewhere in Berlin, engineers began designing the Tiger to ensure that the mathematics of 90 versus 36 would never humiliate the Wehrmacht again. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.